Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a great day. I am Kevin Kelly. He is, of course, Paul Gerard. We are Gerard and Associates. Check us out at gerardassociates.com. This is the GNA Way podcast. Thanks for tuning in. As we continue on our quest to CQI, EMS CQI, we have yet another timely topic, and that is where should EMS CQI sit on the EMS agency's organizational chart. Paul, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
So, my thoughts. Does it matter where CQI sits on the org chart? I think it does. I think that I'll kind of weasel around with this a little bit and use the lawyer thing, but probably needs EMS CQI probably needs to sit high up in the org chart, and I'll liken it to a hospital's compliance program with a VP at the helm, a chief compliance officer who has a matrix organization type thing with a solid line reporting to relationship with the board, or if it's in a government agency, fire service, whatever, a solid line reporting relationship to the selectmen or the governing body, and a dotted line to the CEO, say in a hospital or an EMS agency, government agency, to the fire chief. And I say this essentially. We got to establish the optic, Paul, and the expectations, um, and highlight. We highlight the GNA 4Cs of successful CQI coaches, command presence. We tie it into the 4Cs, and that optic with the chief, whatever you call it, CQI officer or CQI high up. It shows the government that CQI is taken seriously by the EMS agency. But it depends. What are you thinking?
I agree with everything you said, but I'm going to split my answer. I think that organizationally, CQI needs to be considered more highly than it traditionally has been in EMS. That's my opinion. Sitting further up on the org chart gives you a little bit more clout when it comes to getting financing, to get policies written, for making decisions, that sort of thing. And you and I have talked about this over and over again. CQI and EMS is almost always underfunded. It's just not funded the way it should be for CQI folks to do their job properly. So I think from a purely academic policy setting standpoint and whatnot, it should be high up on the chart, and it should, in my opinion, report to the chief and preferably the board. Think about it. Your agency, EMS agencies, are patient care uh, uh, organizations, right? We're all about the patient. We're supposed to be
Right. Yeah.
taking care of people. So if you don't have your patient care quality experts giving their take on how well the organization is providing patient care as high up the chain as it can go, then how does your board know that they're doing well? How does your chief know that you're doing well? So from an organizational chart standpoint, I think it should sit high up. But I said I was going to split my answer, and here's the split. The problem with that is that if you have a high level CQI officer and then don't have much in between that person and the day-to-day CQI operations where folks are talking to the street providers on a regular basis, then oftentimes you create a fair scenario where providers feel that this is a high-level administrative person that I'm talking to. I can get in a lot of trouble if I'm honest and frank and open with that person about what's been going on in my patient care practice. And that can stymie your patient care activities. So I think you have to think in a dual track here. One is from an operational standpoint in terms of the organizational operations. The CQI officer should be pretty high up on that chain of command and in that organizational chart. But from a day-to-day application of the CQI process, you need to get down in the streets with folks and be able to talk their level and be able to make them feel comfortable with having a conversation with you. Well, the biggest fear that we hear from providers is they fear that the conversations we're having with them is going to get back to management and it's going to be in a negative light that they're a bad provider of some sort. So, and again, you and I have talked about this over and over again. We got to get rid of that fear culture. CQI is there to help providers be better providers. That's it. Clear, basic, simple. And that can't be done if they're intimidated by the CQI process.
Yeah, no, I think you nail it. It depends, and where are we coming up with this? And we're coming up with this, and our thoughts and our theories on this because we've been doing it for 18 years. We got 18 years of CQIing EMS CQI programs, managing EMS agency CQI programs, and we've done over 300,000 CQI one-on-one coaching sessions. So, like we said in the last section, we know a lot because we've seen a lot. That's the Farmers Insurance commercial, right?
We're going to steal it.
Yeah,
because that's what we do. We steal all the best stuff.
that's right, and we'll give Farmers Insurance a cut
Absolutely.
of our millions.
Right.
But how much, Paul, does this depend on the EMS CQI agency's ability in command and implementation of what we've come up with, which is the Gerard and Associates 4 C's of EMS CQI leadership behavior?
Yeah, I think it's a great model to follow, right? The 4 C's are command, presence, compassion, competitiveness, and coachability. And those are essential tools for any CQI officer to employ and employ effectively in order to get folks to willfully change their practices from lesser desirable practices to more desirable practices. And that's what you're trying to do, right? A CQI officer is a change agent. So it's hard to be a change agent if you're all alone in the basement of the organization reading run reports and you don't get a lot of support from anybody, right? So that's pretty hard. But where the change actually happens and when you can have a significant influence regardless of where you are on the org chart is in that interaction with the provider. That's where the change happens, right? The change happens because you sat down with the provider and you said, hey, listen, Alice, you should have ALS that patient yesterday. You didn't ALS them. Let's talk about why you didn't, and what are the parameters here? When do you want to opt not to versus when should you? Let's talk about all that stuff. And they've got to feel comfortable talking to you as a colleague and as somebody who's there as their advocate, not as the internal affairs police for the organization. So using the 4 C's is a great tool, and we're going to expound upon those in greater length in a future podcast, as well as some blog or written material that we'll have up on the website, gerardassociates.com, for people to download and read at some point in the near future, because we're still kind of developing out the elements of the 4 C's. But it's a great tool, and it's something that everybody should use. And your level of influence is not relevant to where you fall on the org chart. So, for example, Gerard and Associates is a private third-party QA company. We've been doing EMS QA for 18 years as Gerard and Associates.
Right.
We don't show up on anybody's org chart, nowhere. In fact, most organizations we work with are very, very small organizations that don't even have an org chart. You've got a chief of service and the CQI guy, who's usually your EMS coordinator, who's also your educator, your stock and supply guy. That man or woman wears multiple hats.
Sure.
And that's it. That's the whole structure.
Right.
So, when you've got that level of organization where you don't have that depth, you still have to make positive change. And the way to do it is in positive, constructive feedback to the individual providers. We don't fall anywhere on the org chart. We have no power, no authority within these organizations. And yet we still get people to change their behaviors to productive, proactive changes that are more likely to result in positive patient outcomes.
Yeah, and we've said it before that our thought and our belief is that the most important relationship in the EMS organization is that between the EMS provider and the person that's going to deliver that EMS provider some bad news, potentially,
Yeah, right.
Right? Or, he's going to hurt his feelings, um, going to get butt hurt, whatever you want to call it. But that's the
Right.
most important relationship
Right.
because that provider's day and that EMS provider's desire to go forward is largely dependent upon how that bad news is executed.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, that whole, and we hear it. When when we ask for feedback on the EMS agency's current CQI program, and this is we keep it confidential, and we hear that all the time. That this whole listen, you got to leave your problems at home, get your head in the game, study the statewide treatment protocols. I mean, we
Mm.
hear it all the time, and that is not individual teaching, coaching, and mentoring.
Right. Right. Ideally, for CQI to work at its best, the CQI officer, your medical director, and your chief of service all have to be in tune with each other
Yeah,
in terms of what they're doing to improve patient care quality.
yeah,
Unfortunately, in most agencies, all three, that triad doesn't work well. There are lots of agencies where the service medical director is inactive, doesn't really want to be bothered unless you kill somebody. There are lots of agencies where the staff can't stand the fire chief or the CEO of the organization or
right.
their shift captain, commander, whatever, and you still have to get them to uh, change positively. We have some agencies where the medical director or the medical director designee, if it's not the medical director review run reports, the crew members worked with that provider in the field previously, didn't like him or her,
Yeah,
and so when I sit in front of it, it's really interesting. I'll sit in front of them, and in our system, we have an auditor who reviews the calls, puts comments, anything that could potentially be improved upon, they'll put a comment in.
right.
So that includes a lot of stuff. They're not looking for errors; they're looking for opportunities for improvement. Right?
Yeah,
That's a big shift, right? As opposed to most CQI programs that are looking for the errors.
yeah,
We're looking for anything that's an opportunity for improvement, and then it goes. If it meets criteria, it goes to the medical director for that second review, and they put their comments in. And a lot of times, as a coordinator, when I go and sit with the provider, and I'll start reading them. Okay, so here the auditor's thinking that you should have perhaps ALS this patient, and here's why they're thinking what they're thinking. When they don't like the medical director reviewer, they immediately jump on the audit and try to disprove it, or that guy I can't stand this guy. He's always making us do stuff that he never does himself in the field.
yeah,
And when I say no, that wasn't from the medical director, that's from my auditor that said that. They're like, okay, and then they settle back down. And when I read the same comments, I'm like, oh, okay, and then we discuss it. The gut instinct is because they don't like that medical director reviewer, or in some cases the chief, and they think that CQI is a product of the chief trying to get you
right.
and catch you in things, and that's so they think that you're there on behalf of the chief to mess with them. So we try to get that all out, right? We're an outside
Yeah,
agency, so we try to get rid of all those. We try to create that one-on-one relationship with the coordinator and the provider. Once they trust and respect the coordinator, we can mitigate a lot of that other stuff so that providers see the message and they're not reacting to the messenger.
yeah, and it all comes down to the attitude that both the provider and the CQI coach, what kind of attitude they come into the process and they come into that one-on-one meeting
Right,
with, right?
right. Yeah, and the reason I bring this up at an org chart discussion is because we get calls from people around the country, and when I sit and talk with these folks, a lot of times they lament their problems. Well, I can't do good QA, and I can't because my chief doesn't support me. We don't have the funds. I'm the only person reviewing 50,000 run reports,
Yeah,
and the list goes on and on and on. And they feel so frustrated that they feel that they can't be effective. And what I'm trying to promote and what I'm saying is that in spite of that, while the perfect world, you would have that support, especially if you were higher up on the org chart, which would be ideal. But in the absence of that, it doesn't mean that you can't do good CQI. You can still make major changes, and that happens with the people that you're working with. The problem with most EMS organizations' CQI process is you've got upper management up top that doesn't care. You got people underneath you who don't want to hear from the CQI guy because you feel like you're being, it's the internal affairs division, and it's the Oreo cookie syndrome, right? You're the white stuff in between these two hard surfaces, with people who don't want to be CQI and management that doesn't want to be bothered with helping you with the process, and you're told to make change and to make patient care better, and it just doesn't work that way. Recently, Kevin, we did a survey of providers and asked what the main barriers were to providing effective CQI. You remember
Right.
that
I
survey?
do. Yeah.
And 36% of them said lack of management support. 36% of them also said provider apathy, but 21% of them said lack of medical director involvement, and only 7% of them said everything's fine with my CQI process, everything's great,
Yeah.
we're doing a great job,
Yeah.
and everybody's on the same
Yeah.
page.
We gotta connect with that 7%. We
Yeah,
got, we got to
right.
see this. This is like, because that to me is like the Loch Ness monster or Bigfoot sightings. I mean,
Yeah,
it's just,
yeah.
yeah, okay. I mean, we hear about it, and it's part of folklore and legend. We got to get out there and see the seven
Yeah.
percent.
Well,
Need a
I
road trip.
actually, yeah, right. Road trip. I actually believe the 7% only because I look at it differently. I look at it as 90. That means 97% of agency CQI folks or people who respond to the survey, at least, only 7% of them said our CQI process is great. That means 93% said it isn't. There's problems, and they
Yeah.
identified those problems as. Now we only gave them select options to choose from. This is
Right.
not a scientific survey. It wasn't done
No,
by
we're not
Harvard
scientists.
statisticians. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's just an informal survey, but I can tell you it squares very well with what I hear from people who call, whether they're chiefs of agencies calling and saying, I've got problems with my CQI process. We've tried all sorts of things. We can't fix it. People resent it. There's a lot of stress, anxiety, angst. And right now in EMS, in our environment, everybody's talking about how to reduce that stress and anxiety of the field providers, how we're burning people out. And one of those is through the CQI process. People are having a bad day, and then on top of that, they hear, "Hey, we got to talk about a call you did yesterday."
And they
So,
get it by email
and they get it by email, which I
while
think,
they're on the
ah,
road
ah,
responding to another call with
right,
lights and sirens
right,
blowing through stop signs.
right,
They're getting emails. They shouldn't be looking on their phone. They should be thinking, okay, this is we
yeah,
dispatched to
yeah,
respiratory and going through the protocol in their head. But
yeah,
they're getting see me emails
right,
while
right,
they're
yeah.
going. I
Why
mean,
didn't you
that's
do
that's
it? Why didn't you
incredible.
do a 12 lead on that patient yesterday while you're doing compressions
Yeah.
on today's patient?
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. I
and
mean,
that's one of the big
just
bitches we hear is the email QA, right?
yeah,
Is people hate it, and people do it because they think it's effective. I can blast out 25 emails, and I've talked to 25 people here about what's going on, but people don't like it. They can't read the tone of the
yeah,
email. They don't know if you're yelling at them versus just asking a question. There's not very good interaction back and forth for discussion purposes, and that's where you find the issues, right? It's not you didn't do a 12 lead and you should have. Why didn't you do a 12 lead? It's let's discuss the pros and cons of doing a 12 lead in this patient and where it's applicable, where it may not be, and what you had in this case that makes sense to make you decide not to do it versus why you should have done it.
right.
And you can't do all that in an email. So email QA, in my experience, has not worked very well. It frustrates people. I've yet to meet anybody who said, I love those emails that I get from the
Yeah,
CQI guy, and I think they're
no,
very effective in getting me to change my behaviors. I just don't see that or hear it.
no, no, and it creates unnecessary anxiety.
Right.
It just if and it also is how important is is CQI in the grand scheme of an EMS agency when the method of delivery of your CQI data or your review is by email. Yeah, it's these guys that it's the system guys who don't want to get into the nitty gritty, don't want to do the one on one, who don't want to do the in person coaching because that's the hard part,
That's the hard part.
and they send it out by email. We talked about it earlier in the podcast. Uh, how does that set forth the attitude of the EMS provider going into that relationship or that meeting to discuss whatever the problem was?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. So it's just not something I'm not. As I said, I'm not a fan. I think there are more downsides to it than positives. The reason people do it is they do it either because they're lazy, but in most cases, it's not so much a laziness thing. It's a, again, I'm one person doing QA, or I've got two people doing QA, and we do 50, 60, 80, 100,000 calls a year. I just don't have the resources to meet with everybody one on one. So what you're saying, as far as the individual meetings and meeting with people one on one, is impractical. And at least here, I can cover as many bases as I can cover. That, from an efficiency standpoint, makes sense, but it doesn't work well with the providers and creates more anxiety, stress, anger. And they'll send back a polite, "Oh, I didn't do it because," but then what they're saying to their partner is expletive, expletive, expletive.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
freaking asshole, wants to know why I didn't, and they just kind of go off.
yeah.
And again, we hear it all the time when we take over agency CQI process, when they hire us to come in and we talk to people, we ask them, so what was it about the previous program that you didn't like? There's a long list of issues, and that's one of them. Is
Right,
that it's
yeah.
very impersonal, it's very cold, and it doesn't allow me the chance to discuss my reasoning and rationale thoroughly and completely. So I don't feel like I'm represented very well in my answers back. It's easier just to say, okay, I'll do one next time, and then not do it or do whatever, than it is to discuss the elements of the case that made him decide to do that. So you're not educating this person to do better. You're just telling them to do better. And my definition is do a 12 lead on that guy. Okay, so the bride is doing it, but they don't know why you want them to do it. So, getting into the discussions is really critical.
Yeah, and not only CQI by email. I mean, not only does it not work, not only does it not out of the starting gate uh, put that relationship in the best light. Uh, you're making withdrawals from if there was any kind of emotional bank account. Covey
Yeah,
talks about making withdrawals from the emotional bank account. If there was any trust building going on or any of that deposits in the provider's emotional bank account, uh, that that's just a significant withdrawal. I mean,
right.
and again, it goes back to how important is CQI in the EMS, in the grand scheme of EMS, patient care and customer service. If you're getting this news by email, versus and what we tout is our ability to do these one-on-ones and to do
Right.
the stuff that people don't like to do, and that's sort of where our gifts are, if you will.
Right. So if you're that one person or two people in an agency that's doing, 30, 40, 50, 80,000 calls a year with one or two people or whatnot, it doesn't matter where you fall on the org chart, right? It doesn't matter if you're vice president of quality improvement, if you're the only guy. It might help that you have some access upper on the upper side of the chain of command that you can affect some change perhaps. But when it
Yeah,
comes to operationalizing your CQI process and getting the most out of it and getting people to do what needs to be done without pissing them off, quite frankly,
yeah,
you just don't have that ability without doing something in bulk like email QA. So, and people think, well, I'm just asking a light question. It's not for the heavy lifting stuff. It's for the easy things like, hey, 12 lead or something like that. But that's not how the providers really take it. So, you really got to be careful with that. It's something that I think makes sense on paper, but isn't really the best way to go about it. And it's oftentimes due to an underfunding of the CQI process, where one person feels like the only way to get through the slog of reports that I got to get through is to just throw out a bunch of emails so I can say I've done 100 calls today. I reviewed 100 calls and provided feedback on them. Yeah, you didn't really provide feedback that's well constructed.
yeah. And I think you're right. I think well, it does depend. Does it matter where it sits on the org chart? Well, maybe it does. But what matters more than the optic of where it sits on the org chart or any formal authority that that position on the org chart has is that person's command of the four C's, and reinforcing the four C's. That is the bread and butter of this, not the formal authority
Yeah.
of where this, or the optic of where this might sit on the org chart.
A well constructed CQI program has both. right? So your CQI process is higher up on the org chart so that somebody can address the clinical issues along with the funding and need for a properly funded CQI process, along with any other improvement initiatives that they're partaking in. They want to make sure that the higher ups know about those and approve of them. But then the flip side of that part of where you fall in the org chart is when it comes to operationalizing it, you can still have a ton of influence regardless of where you fall on your organization's org chart. Even if you're working in the basement all alone and it's just you and the chief is the only chain of command there is,
Yeah.
then you can still affect change even though your name's not anywhere in the org chart. So don't lose faith, don't lose hope. You can still affect change downward, even if you can't affect it in an upwards fashion. And when it comes to CQI, it's the quality, not the quantity, that counts.
Yeah.
So do a good job with what you're doing, as opposed to just trying to get through, 10,000 run reports.
Yeah. I mean, there's a significant opportunity for the CQI coach to have an amazing impact on the EMS agencies. So as long as they employ the four C's.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. It's not just the command presence, it's everything that goes along in that command presence. And to your point, we're outsourced. I mean, we're a third party. Yet we go in there and we have their attention. We've built that relationship. We've built that trust with the EMS provider. We have very effective one-on-ones. We provide very effective, timely feedback, and they see the opportunity based on the objective scoring of these run reports that they don't need to get upset or feelings hurt or feel like they're not good providers. Just ticking off a couple of low ones and twos in the scoring process. I mean, they see a dramatic improvement in the score, but more importantly, they see the relationship building that we put in to the CQI process.
Yeah, and you can see it. And it takes a while. That doesn't happen overnight. It takes months, sometimes years, with individuals to get to that level of trust. But you're there when that individual, when you call in to talk to somebody and, hey, you here to talk to me? And no, I'm actually here to talk to somebody else. And they're kind of disappointed. I like our discussions. I like our talks about clinical patient care stuff. So you've won them over when they're looking forward to
Yep.
talking with CQI folks, or at least not hating it, at least not trying to hide things from the CQI process or avoid meeting with the CQI person. So when you get to that level, it's actually pretty fulfilling for you as a CQI coordinator. It's not only good for the provider, it's really good for you because being a CQI person is very difficult. Those are difficult conversations to have, and you have to have them all day long, every day. So that can wear on you after a while.
Yeah, and regarding the scoring and the data and the analysis, what we find is that the chief, the boards, the selectmen, the elected officials, what they want to see is progress, and they
Right,
want to see improvement, and they want to see a good value for their dollar, or the tax dollar or the constituent dollar.
right.
And very easy, just ticking out a couple of low level items to see that dramatic improvement.
Mm. Yeah, the low hanging fruit. Oftentimes when we start with an agency, we see a big jump initially in their score, and it's because people are doing things repetitively. Their care might be great, and I'll give you an example. I was talking to a guy a couple of days ago where his score was in the high 30s. Right? He's a new employee to this agency, and his score is in the high 30s, which is a terrible score. And initially, he was pretty down about that. He was like, "Oh my god!" So then we reviewed each of his calls, went through all the data, and that's what we do during our reviews.
Yeah.
And we found that he has one common denominator for what he's doing. His patient care, is excellent. He's actually a very good provider. The problem is he's extricating everybody out to the truck before starting that excellent patient care instead of treating on scene, which is required not only by protocol, but that service's medical director has been espousing for months, if not years now, for providers to treat on scene and stop extricating first. So he's a new provider to this agency. He comes on board where he used to work. He used to extricate everybody out to the truck and then do everything on the way to the hospital. That's a big no-no in this particular organization. So what we could do is narrow it down that his score is due to one reason really, and it's because he's extricating, he's getting gigged on all these calls for extricating first, but his care is excellent. So if he
Yeah.
stops doing that and treats on scene like his medical director wants him to, he's a rock star. He's a superstar paramedic.
Right.
So so that's the ending message, right? The ending message is, hey, you're actually doing really, really well. Forget the data, right? It's not about the number or the score.
Right.
Within the score, here's what's going on that you can fix that'll make those numbers be much more, palatable, much more enjoyable. Quite frankly, when you see your next report and you get a score of 92 or something, you're going to feel a lot better about yourself. So, it gives providers a lot of confidence when they're working over time and seeing those scores go up. They know that what they're doing is solid. They're just not assuming that they're a great provider because nobody ever provides them meaningful feedback. So it has a positive impact when they have a level of self-confidence in themselves when providing care because they know they're doing the right thing because of those conversations.
Yeah, and another great point is that data is a snapshot in time, and you are not your data, and the provider as well. If they have a command of the four C's as well, uh, that relationship will go much better. I mean, we've talked about this. Ideally, when we're engaged in these one-on-ones, what's the end in mind? We want the provider to come in and say something like, "Hey, Paul, thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me. I really enjoy our opportunities, these learning and coaching opportunities, the opportunity to learn more. I love the feedback you provide. I really wasn't happy with my score of 56, our last meeting, and I hope to see some significant improvement in that score." That's what we want to really ideally hear. An engaged, enthusiastic, want to do better. One of
Right,
the four C's is competitiveness, right? So Kevin's a 56. Kevin don't want to be a 56. He wouldn't take too well to that. He might have, given some pushback, but the next time Kevin gets scored, Kevin wants to see that in the 90s because he knows other people on the team are in the 90s and he doesn't want to be a 56.
right,
It's one of
right,
the four C's. The other
right,
one is, want that provider to be coachable. And coming in with that attitude demonstrates that ability to be coached and that
right,
desire to be coached. And even the just coming in and wanting that information and that feedback to address issues, that's modeling. That's modeling high performance behavior. And that's also demonstrating an aspect of that command presence as well. So in that relationship, we want that uh, CQI coach to be in the moment, to be enthusiastic as well. We don't want the CQI coach to be anxiety ridden,
right,
and we want that to go smooth. Beginning with the end in mind, we want the CQI coach and that provider to come in with that positive attitude.
right.
And if both sides demonstrate a command of the GNA 4Cs, no doubt will that process and that coaching session go better.
Yeah, a large portion of that is the compassion C of the four C's, right?
Yeah,
If you talk with people with compassion and not just hustling them out of the room after you kind of rip them a new one because you need to get to the next guy that's going to rip a
right.
new one, you sit and you show them some compassion, right? Show them some love, right? I appreciate what you do. You work hard. I know there's a lot of things out there that are competing against you when you're trying to provide good patient care. I understand what you're saying about the cops being more of a hindrance than helpful and the nursing staff giving you wrong information out of that clinic that you went to or family members. You and I have been on those calls. We know what they're
Yeah.
like. We know how challenging they are. We
Yep.
know that things don't always go perfectly, right? Things are not going to go perfectly.
Right.
Okay. So what do you do about that, right? So when something imperfect pops up, what's the best way to handle that? And that's the coaching you can provide that'll help people get over the learning curve Instead of waiting for them to take 10 years to learn it themselves or 5 years to learn it themselves, you can shorten that to 6 months if you capture it quickly and go and sit and talk with this person in depth about all those challenges. So providers have to deal with so many challenges on a call, and a whole lot of challenges that are renting space in their head when they're on that call that are unrelated to their job, right? Personal issues, home issues, finance issues, all sorts of things that are challenging them that you can't just leave at the doorway when you walk in, even though we always say, well, leave your problems at the doorway and you got to come in and
Yeah.
be focused. And to some degree that's a true statement, but that's really hard to do. So you really have to use the compassion part of the 4 C's to make sure that your feedback to providers is good and it's useful and helpful to them, and that they walk out of it like you're saying. They walk out of there saying, "Okay, I don't love the fact that people are looking at my run reports and giving me feedback." Nobody loves that process in general. Most people don't enjoy having somebody critique their work. I fully understand that, but at least if they walk out and say, well, at least if I got to be critiqued, this is the person I want to critique me. So, if you can get to that, then you've gone a long way in influencing uh, people's care, as opposed to lamenting that if you only had more money, if you only were higher up on the org chart and had authority, so you could tell these people what they need to do and not suggest because they're not listening. So I feel like I need to use a stronger stick, and I'm not high enough on the command structure. I don't have enough authority to reprimand these people. If I only had the authority to reprimand them, everything would be better because I could force them to do the right thing. That's the wrong headspace to be in to be a CQI coach.
Oh, absolutely. The carrot and the stick, and that doesn't work. We've seen it. 18 years we've been doing this. Again, over 300,000 one-on-one coaching sessions, and that's not counting the time spent with chiefs and boards of selectmen and boards of directors, teaching them about this process and their need to be patient as we get this thing going, because out
Right.
of the starting gate, some of these scores aren't going to be where in your head you think they are.
Right.
You don't have people chronically complaining about EMS providers. Does that mean the EMS providers are following statewide treatment protocols? No, not necessarily. And it takes some time to build the system, to build the relationship, to build the trust, to make those deposits in the emotional bank account, and get some traction on knocking out the low hanging fruit, and you're going to see these scores improve.
Right. So I guess that's kind of our closing message,
Yeah.
right? Is that organizations should look at promoting quality improvement higher up the org chart. So your board of directors, your chief of service, your CEO, all those higher level management folks know exactly how well that agency is providing patient care, and not have to go through multiple layers that get morphed into something different by the time it reaches those folks. So that's a great way to make sure that the agency stays on top of its patient care activity and makes patient care a priority in the organization, as opposed to other things that can sometimes take precedence over the patient care. So that's one recommendation. And the other is, regardless of where you fall in the org chart, you can have a tremendous amount of influence if you interact with the providers properly with a good, solid CQI program that uses the 4 C's as we've
Yeah.
developed them. And there are other theories too. It's not just about what we've written, but what we've got is the 4 C's, which we've talked about in other podcasts. So if you're interested, listen to those podcasts. But we also are going to be doing more on the 4 C's in the future that you'll be able to see.
Yeah, I think that's a great final message. Well, that's all we have for you today. We would love to work with you and reinforce your EMS CQI program. Check us out. Check out our podcast on EMS CQI return on investment. Check out our calculator on the Girard Associates website. Our podcast, we're being picked up by Apple, Spotify, Podbean, Google, all the biggies. So, again, thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Stay safe, stay in the fight, and Godspeed.
Talk soon. Stay safe, everyone.
On 5.